Recording in progress.
Okay, let's begin this evening.
Sharon, unmute yourself, please.
All right, so we begin this evening's session. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody around the globe. So today's session is, it's a hardcore subject called the defense industrial business. It could also be the military industrial complex. So anyway, fasten your seat belts. We have a very impressive set of speakers, some of whom you have heard a number of times during the FDG season 1. So, and those veterans are, of course, Ranu Das, Alok Sheel, and Madhu Ranganathan. But today we have two new panelists who are making their debut on the FDG season 2, and these are Arvind Mehta and Shivi Vishal Nigam. So I'm going to be introducing both Arvind and Shivi to the rest of the family here, so that we get to know a little more about their accomplishments. So I'm beginning with Arvind. Arvind Mehta, as we know, is married to our own Geeta Swaroop, Gen 3. They were contemporaries at St. Stephen's and decided to sort of intertwine their lives together. Arvind has a very impressive academic record, BA honors from St. Stephen's, MA from D School. He's been a topper and a merit scholar, a national level player for aquatics and basketball, and selected for the Indian schoolboys team. Joined the IAS in 1984, allocated Himachal cadre. He got his choice because of his high rank. Worked 21 years in HP, in finance, planning, and other departments of the government, and 15 years in the government of India, in the ministries of defense, which is the area of expertise that we expect him to bring to today's session, finance, commerce, and industry. He was also a part of the RCEP negotiations in 2015-16. He retired as secretary to the government of India in the finance ministry as a member secretary of the 15th Finance Commission. Arvind and Geeta are settled in their own apartment at Maharani Bagh at New Delhi. Welcome, Arvind, to the panel and to FDG season 2. I now go on to talking about Shivi, also known as Vishal Nigam, Generation 3, economic honors and an MBA in international business, 8,000 flying hours with the Indian Air Force, authored 2 books, one as an editor, 6 years in the private sector as well. He's been a tutor to 3 less privileged kids in Maharashtra, Haryana, and Bastar. And a very interesting facet about Shivi is that he calls himself a solivagant. I'll say that again, solivagant. So I looked up, Google to figure out what that meant, and it means a lone wanderer. Incidentally, he's traveled deep into the heartland of India as a solo wanderer, and has lived with villagers. He spent time with tribals. His favorite destination was Bastar in central India. So, Shivi, that's a very interesting facet of what you do. Welcome to being the anchor for this panel. And with that introduction, I'll request you to take it away. Over to you, Shivi.
Thank you, Chan Bhai sir, for such a lovely introduction. And Well, it's fascinating to be here with the family. Yes, this is the first time that I'm going to be speaking. But the last session that I attended was absolutely fabulous, Gauri Didi. Honestly, it took me into the 80s when we used to drive past that flyover, Motibag flyover, and come down. You could get the whiff of love from Muni Mosi ji's house. There were some iconic homes which helped me grow during those times. Muni Mosi ji's house. Then was Nagendra Mosa ji's house. I still remember maybe as a 10, 11-year-old boy walking into that house. Narendra Mosa ji used to be sitting in the front lawn, a simple, beautiful home. And he used to be always at an angle, probably following the sun. I don't know, but I remember him in that position. Then Sheila Mosiji. We used to enter from the side uh, path. It was a small, narrow path. And as we entered the TV room, she used to be sitting on the chair next to the telephone. Then, you'd be surprised, but maybe I was not even 10, staying in Kanpur. The home that comes to my mind was Kirti Mosi's. I remember that Haveli, walking in through the passage. And one day we were having a party at a place, and one of the neighbors who was also, I think, partying with us, the fridge in the neighborhood caught fire, in their house caught fire. And I thought, how are they going to afford another fridge? So there's such beautiful memories of those times which Gauri Didi you brought in that discussion. But, in the 90s, when I left my home, I left mom, and I started wandering away. My home was Poonam Didi's home. I spent 24 weeks, and out of those 24 weeks, I was in Bangalore and they were in Bangalore too. 20 weeks I was with Poonam Didi over the weekend. Not once did she ever say, no, we are busy or we're going out. In fact, Ankur Anubhav were small boys, and I remember they were going out for dinner. She didn't mention. I came on my bike, and it was so nice of her that I accompanied them to that gathering with their friends. So such beautiful memories you brought in, Gauri Didi. I remember the beautiful times I've spent in New York with you. Thank you so much for the last session. Now, I am going to talk about the fault lines that are prevalent in this country, India, and we will see a map and then zoom into the recent areas of conflict to understand the topography and what are the issues that we face as soldiers fighting there. Just a disclaimer, all the photographs that have been taken by me have been taken by me, so they aren't from the internet, whether it's of the Siachen or the Galwan area. So let's just run through them, the area for the next 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so what you see is the map of India, and the areas of the two areas of conflict which started in 2019 went on to 2020-21 are Galwan and Pengong So, located on the map as shown. Now, when you see the map of India, when I speak with my students, I tell them the map of India is got 2 earlobes. The left is the POK. The right one is the Aksai Chin. Now, what separates India from POK is called the line of control, and it is delineated on the map. While what separates India from Aksai Chin today is the line of actual control, or as the name suggests, the line of wherever that the two countries have control over. And Galwan and Pengong So lie on these two, on the line of actual control. And then you have this third eye. This is a triangular area which runs from NJ 9842, and this is Siachen. which is the position that India held on to in early 1980s. And we have the advantage of height here. So you have the POK, which is the left earlobe, the Aksai Chin, the right earlobe, and Siachen, which overlooks POK, the Karakoram Highway, Aksai Chin, and that triangular piece of land is a land of immense importance. Apart from this, there are some fault lines which exist within the country, and one is in the northeast, where we saw recent conflict between the two states. There is an axis of the Naxals which extend from Bihar, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh. And then you have another fault line which is in the south, where there were some members of the members from this part of the country which had moved into the ISIS. Also, as we are seeing, there is a change in the emerging security paradigm, and we are seeing that the internal security is becoming more and more a part of the national security. And hence, when you're looking at the traditional threat matrix, that is also undergoing a change. But the most critical flashpoint is what we are going to very, very briefly look at today, and that is Jammu and Kashmir. So this is Jammu and Kashmir as on the map. This is how it looks from the air: pristine, beautiful, should have been peaceful, but now a land of conflict. This is the left earlobe, which is occupied by Pakistan. The right is Aksai Chin, occupied by the Chinese. And then you have the line of control, as you can see on the map, which runs up to NJ 9842. And the circle is Siachen. Actually, the blue part is the triangular piece of land is the Siachen. How does Siachen look like? It's when you fly over these beautiful mountains, you fail to understand why there is so much of bloodshed in this area. Why did it take so many lives? But that's how life is. This is another frame of Siachen. Again, all the photographs have been taken by me. And what you see in the square are the igloos. And the job of the Indian Air Force is to carry out precision drops. We use the AN-32 to drop supplies there. So we maintain those troops who kind of walk all the way from the Waifork, which is the Shiok Valley, up to this, or actually the riverbank to Siachen, and it takes many days to do that. Coming to the area of conflict, we're going to zoom into that today. One is the Galwan Valley, where you had a fist fight last year, and Pengong So, which if one was following the news, one heard about the 8 fingers. So we'll see what the 8 fingers are. This is again the Shiok Valley, about 10 kilometers short to the right is the Galwan Valley. Again, the photographs being taken by me, and this is how we drop along the T. The Pengong So. It's a beautiful lake. Many of you must have visited. Most of the lake is in China, but at the widest point is finger 4, and from finger 1 to finger 8 and further up to Srijab. Finger 8 is the one in the red, the extreme right side marked in the red, and further up to Srijab, further east, was within the Indian side of the line of actual control. For some reason, I don't know why, but there was a road that had come up from finger 8 to finger 4. And this was around the turn of the century. However, for many years, both Indian and Chinese troops used to walk along this road, exchange pleasantries and come back. Until April, May of 2019, when the Chinese asked the Indian soldiers not to patrol on that area. And that's when the conflict happened, which escalated short of a total war. So when so this is another view of the Pengong So Lake. The widest area is finger 4 at finger 4. And the only reason that the Chinese could not go beyond finger 4 in terms of paving the road was because why can't I click? So it was because of the ridge, the pointed, this ridge is very narrow and very steep. And the only way that you can access finger 3 from finger 4 is by walking. And obviously it would have required a lot of effort to pave a route there. So that's the reason why the Chinese weren't able to pave a road beyond this point. Now, the poetry starts here, Mami. Let's just salute the soldiers. One cannot even imagine the kind of difficulty, hardship, sacrifice these guys have to undergo. So I'm going to play a video of a C-130 flown by my friend, landing at DBO, the world's highest airfield. And anyone who studied history in terms of that area, the airplane flies through the Chipchap River and lands at DBO, takes off and follows the Chipchap River on the way out. So let's listen to the video before we deep dive into the subject.
Shivi, the video isn't playing. You have to, the video isn't playing.
Yeah, I know. We're just trying to do it. Otherwise, we'll skip the video, maybe play it at the end.
Okay.
Just give me 30 more seconds. Yeah. No. Okay. So what we're going to do is just remove this. So what we're going to do is move into the subject per se, and maybe at the end, before Ranu Mama speaks or after Ranu Mama speaks, we will play the video. No, you can delete this. So how does a nation as such build capabilities? There are 3 ways a nation can build capabilities for itself. Either it builds its own capability. That means it produces its own weapon systems. The second is that it buys capabilities from another country. That's what India had been doing for a very, very long time. 70% of our capabilities were built either by getting it from the Russians or the Americans, the French, the Israelis. And the third is by stealing technology. So these are the 3 ways that any country can build capabilities for themselves. Also, what I have observed of late is that the global defense industry has evolved, and depending on the country and country strategy, there is variation in the spectrum of outsourcing and inclusiveness. What it means is that there are more and more countries which are ready to come and engage. Again, it depends on country, what is the market available, and what is the country strategy. The second thing is the global defense industry, when they're looking at a platform, earlier, they looked at the entire platform as a denial, as a platform which was sensitive to national security. Now, for example, if it's an aeroplane, an empennage or can be constructed anyway. So it's not a part which is sensitive to the national security. There's only a very small spectrum of that platform which is actually sensitive, and therefore majority of the platform can be collaborated wherever there are favorable factors of production and favorable linkages. The third point is the exports of defense equipment. Earlier was an exception. Today, it's becoming a norm. And there is greater flexibility and tolerance when you look at the export control regimes. India is now a member of 3 out of the 4 multilateral export control regimes. So that is the next difference. The fourth is that relationships are no longer a buyer-seller relationships. It's no longer transactional relationships. They're now shifting from a transactional to a relationship of partnership. Since a large part of the platforms can be produced elsewhere, countries which have favorable factors of production, countries which have good linkages, logistics, they can find their way into feeding into the global supply chain. So simply, putting it simply, the seller looks for cheap labor, cheap land, and the buyer looks for possibly manufacturing in the country because it will give them employment, to generate employment for that country. Also, that's my view. No country is going to share critical technology. There's no point carrying out R&D on the entire spectrum of technology. But the more manufacturing you do, technology will tacitly flow over the years. So that is something which many industries have been doing in this country. Now, coming to the Indian defense industrial base, which is the topic of discussion. When you look at the Indian defense industrial base, it is definitely expanded. So till the turn of the century, it was largely the public sectors which were servicing the armed forces. Today, you have many others, the private sectors, the foreign collaborators who are servicing. So the defense industrial base is expanded. There is great traction at the policy level. People are ready to hear. People are ready to cooperate. That is in the government. A lot of work and risks are being taken by the private sector. So you have large companies to the medium and small and micro, all participating in this business of building capabilities for the country. Some of them are actually doing out of passion. It's difficult to believe the amount of investments that they have put in is only due to passion. As a result, what's happened? Today, when you look at Navy, you make surface as well as submersible vessels. When you look at the Air Force, you're making airborne platforms, early warning platforms. The Army, you manufacture artillery guns, you manufacture tanks. So a large amount of manufacturing is being carried out in this country. But what are the accuracy? What is stopping the Indian defense industry to blossom the way it has the potential to blossom is because of the processes. The processes are so protracted. They keep changing. Probably you've had about 9 or 10 defense procedures that have come up in the last 20 years. So they keep changing every now and then. Protracted processes result in acquiring -2 generation platforms. So if you have a process which has been going on for 10 years, technology is changed by the time you actually end up finalizing it. Delayed payments, which kind of stifle the MSMEs, who are the backbone of defense manufacturing. And last but not least is the marginal spend on R&D. We as a country spend 0.7 to 0.8% of GDP. The gross expenditure on R&D is very meager. Not only the government, but also the private sector spends a very small percentage on research and development. So if India aspires to become a significant manufacturing hub and feed into the global supply chain, it will have to work on better linkages. It will have to work on more skilled factors of production. It will have to work on improving infrastructure, logistics, and that is the work to be done. Now, since this government has come in, there has been a lot of talk about self-reliance. I think they use the word Atmanirbharta. Let us hear from Alok Bhai Saab, from the economic, the macro standpoint, that is the national economy. What is Atmanirbharta? Is it a vision and a policy statement? And is it really backed up? Let us hear from him. Alok Bhai Saab.
Okay, thank you, Shivi. When Shivi asked me to participate in this session, I was very hesitant because I'm really out of my depth in the area of defense industry, defense procurement, not an area I've really, had any exposure to. So he asked me to concentrate more on the Atmanirbhar, what you call aspect of today's discussion, and and link it to defense industry, defense procurement to the extent I could. Now, beginning with Atmanirbhar Bharat, I must confess I myself am confused. When it was first announced, it was announced as part of the COVID stimulus package, as you all will remember, in the first half of 2020. So, what is the linkage between Atmanirbhar and the response to the COVID? So, is it a strategy for reviving growth and increasing employment? Is it part of that global trend towards economic nationalism, which is led by the trade spat between US and China? Was it conceived as some sort of an insurance mechanism against disruption of critical global supply chains during pandemics or other crises which can disrupt global trade, so that you need to be self-sufficient in those critical areas? Is it a Make in India Mark II? As you all will recall, there was a few years ago, a major initiative on Make in India. And if so, what's the difference between Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India? And finally, as some people have been speculating, is it really a backtracking on the reforms of the early 90s, where India moved from import substitution, industrialization, to a regime of free trade and openness, free trade openness? So let me comment on each of these four aspects in turn. Now, Atmanirbharta as a strategy for reviving growth and generating employment really rests on flimsy theoretical grounds, according to economists. That is the current consensus, I would say. In any case, these protectionist urges emanate largely from the advanced economies, who find themselves, sort of hoist with their own petard because they're becoming increasingly non-competitive. So I find it surprising that India should be pitching itself on the wrong side of the debate. Secondly, as an insurance mechanism against disruption of global supply chains, I think this aspect has some merit, provided the critical items are clearly identified and the costs recognized, because state subsidies might be necessary to make up for the competitiveness deficit. Tariffs may have to be raised, and you have to see to what extent they are consistent. This is consistent with WTO rules. Of course, the WTO itself is, on its seems to be on its last legs, is another issue. Then Make in India did not really have a self-sufficiency angle, as the objective was to produce more in India through structural reforms to make India more competitive. It was not, think to retreat behind tariff barriers and to import substitution. So that is something, distinguishes Atmanirbhar from Make in India. And as far as backtracking from the trade reforms of the early 90s, I don't think Atmanirbhar, the policy makers have made out a persuasive argument on why this backtracking should be done. Now, India adopted the ISI model of growth after independence because of its bitter experience with free trade under imperial rule, the apparent success of the Soviet Union in becoming a developed country within a generation. And then there were the prevalent theories of export pessimism of, Nurse, Prebisch, Andagunda Frank, then prevalent. But these theories were then subsequently laid to rest by the newly industrialized economies, the Asian tigers, who showed that developing countries can be competitive in manufacturing and they can leverage external markets to grow at hitherto unknown rates over an extended period. In fact, India's own economic history has shown that periods of trade expansion have also been periods of high growth. And globally, the decline in growth in the wake of the global financial crisis has also been linked to the decline in international trade. Okay, so having sort of looked at what Atmanirbharta is in my perception, let me turn to the issue of Atmanirbharta and defense and the defense industry. Now, the trade-off between free trade and Atmanirbharta has limited relevance here because free trade theories presuppose free markets and private players with governments at arm's length from both. It is true that most technology trade is internal to large transnational corporations and that governments bat for transnational corporations originating in their countries. And there are also a number of TNCs in defense. However, even where technology is proprietary and protected by IPR, under a regime of free trade, goods and services are generally available off the shelf in the market. To my understanding, this is not the case in defense trade, especially that involving high-end strategic technologies. And I think Shivi also referred to this. These markets are not free, as such items cannot be bought off the shelf, even where the manufacturers are private entities. Even where government-to-government agreements are not involved, approval of the exporting government is generally required, probably always required, but those more knowledgeable might be able to throw more light on this. So it is not manifest whether in such circumstances one can and should adopt an Atmanirbhar stance unless you happen to be a superpower, which India clearly is not. A superpower by its very nature possesses state-of-the-art proprietary strategic technologies that middling powers like India do not. It is not dependent on other countries for technology or critical supplies. The trade-off for a middling power is whether it should negotiate to procure ready-to-use cutting-edge defense equipment or negotiate to eventually produce the equipment domestically through a process that ultimately leads to a transfer of technology. Now, a superpower might be willing to sell state-of-the-art defense equipment to a close ally, of course at a high cost. It is, however, very unlikely that it would transfer state-of-the-art technology, as that could threaten its own superpower status in future. The most likely outcome is transfer of second or third best technologies that the importing country could then use as a platform for its own R&D program that could hopefully one day lead to the development of state-of-the-art defense technology in-house. This would, however, require government to invest heavy amounts in R&D in both the public and private sectors. And I don't see the Indian government doing that presently. Such defense Atmanirbharta is no doubt a high-risk strategy, but has the advantages of being cheaper and of creating indigenous production ability, which is critical for keeping defense equipment operational, even if diplomatic relations with the exporting country worsen, or if imported supplies are not available for some reason. This could make a critical difference in the ability to sustain a protracted war with a strong antagonist. And then defense Atmanirbharta also has revenue earning potential through exports to third countries, which also Shivi referred to. So to conclude, in practice, the optimal strategy for a middling power like India may well be to adopt a combination of the two strategies, buy some critical state-of-the-art defense equipment as a force multiplier, while negotiating transfer of technology and indigenous production for its workhouse defense equipments, so that it is largely self-sufficient and able to scale up production where required to sustain an extended war. So that is what I could come up with. And as I said, I'm out of my depth in this area, and some of the arguments might be a little simplistic, but over to you, Shivi.
Shivi, you're on mute. Unmute.
Okay, great points, Alok Bhai Saab. When you look at transfer of technology, I guess it has to be seen in perspective. And I doubt if any country is ever going to transfer the entire spectrum of technology. And hence, from country to country, you have to be smart enough to understand which technology is in denial and on which part the R&D has to be carried out. And you're absolutely right there. Maybe at the end of, in the Q&A, I would probably flag one point regarding self-sufficiency and self-reliance. And what does it mean for Make in India? But now, I'll go to Madhubhai sir. And Madhubhai sir, when you look at defense industry, the repository of technology there are the MSMEs. Any country in Taiwan, 92 to 93% of the industries are the MSMEs. We have about 8,000 companies participating in India's defense economy. A majority of them are MSMEs. What is the role and how can we help the MSMEs service the Indian defense economy better? Madhubhai sir.
Thank you. Shivi, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I will be talking on this subject, which has been introduced by Shivi, and Alok has given delineated some outlined boundaries. I was associated with defense and defense production and defense supplies and defense imports when I was in Exim Bank. And I saw it from close quarters as a player who was combining with the government. And at Exim Bank, we used to support export of Indian defense goods to partnership countries. And these included naval as also aero vessels. We also partnered in import of equipments. So with that, I will be talking. I'm not a defense expert so much, but I have been associated with defense and defense goods as Exim Bank this thing, and I've experienced some of the problems faced by companies who are supplying to the defense sector. So I'll be talking from that perspective. My association and my experience has this thing that India has always attempted Atmanirbharta or self-reliance in defense production and defense supplies right from beginning, almost from the start of planning. And a second part has always been to maximize procurement from a large variety of vendors, mostly MSMEs. One aspect of Indian policy is that we never try to maximize only one aspect, either that we are not, but try to maximize several aspects at the same time. So the aspects which India was trying to maximize is to attempt self-reliance, distribute production ability amongst a lot of vendors, including MSMEs, attain state-of-art technological sophistication, minimize cost of procurement, and the pressure on fiscal through defense production and defense goods. Some of these objectives are self-contradictory and create problems internally. But over the last 70 odd years, we have attained a substantial sophistication in our production base, and we are steady suppliers of defense goods to a large number of countries, and defense exports is a small but a noticeable segment of our export bill. It's not very large in terms of absolute numbers, only about 3,000 odd crores, but the variety of goods being exported are quite a few. And there has been a lot of internal absorption of foreign technology, and foreign technology transfer has been taking place consistently over the last 20, 30 years because of a policy called the offset policy, where all production procurements of 2,000 crore and above necessitate that the foreign supplier mandatorily procure about 25% from Indian vendors, or transfer technology to ensure subsequent production of items from Indian vendors, or supports production of in various forms. So over the period of time, a lot of technology transfer has taken place, and Indian vendors have become what you call market competitive in the global arena in a number of items. And as Shivi mentioned, there are over 8,600 odd Indian vendors. Majority of them are MSMEs. And it's a pronounced policy objective of the ordnance factories. And India produces its distinct through a series of and a very well laid out network of ordnance factories that they have MSME vendors as their trusted benchmark vendors. And they have a very elaborate process of certification, qualification, and enrollment. I will talk about the problems here. The problems come in from the process of the other objectives which these ordnance factories are, and that is to minimize the cost and the fiscal impact of the defense assets on the budget, and to ensure lowest cost procurement and the highest technological awareness. So one of the policy systems which have come into place is the policy of no cost, no commitment when it comes to evaluating vendor supply, which means that no ordnance factory gives a commitment to buy or even have interest in an equipment until it is shown to be of a quality which is acceptable to them. Now, this creates a self-contradictory problem for the vendor. This thing, you have to outguess what the system wants. As Shivi mentioned, there is a lot of passion and a desire for excellence among the vendor base, and each individual company tries to grow and do well. So they do try to come up to the benchmark standards, but this no cost, no commitment implies that until the last minute, until the order is approved, there is no guarantee that it will get produced. Now, when the implication of this, as far as the vendor is concerned, from the point of view of fundraising or support systems, that cost of capital which he experiences is very high. There is an inverse relationship between cost of capital and the risk. And the Indian system, the risk is very high, even though you have a monopoly player, even though the monopoly buyer has said that he wants to buy a particular product, say a missile system or a bulletproof vest or a anti-cold thermal wear, but you can see entire range. They will never commit and they will never confirm until everything is satisfied to their thing. And they want state-of-art excellence and matching with what the global competition is like. Now, when these vendors are trying to achieve these multiple ends and no cost, no commitment, when they come to banks for finance, and the banking sector, what they experience is first you get the order, then we can't take a risk on. We are not what you call equity lenders, or we can't take the equity risk. And suppose the risk order does not come, we're not going to finance. So they're caught in this no man's land. And because of this, the progress of self-reliance and Atmanirbharta is a halting one. In some places it is taken off, in some places it is not taken off, depending on a lot of luck and depending on a lot of accidents, lucky accidents, and not policy. And the costing mechanics turn sour, and a lot of vendors who are outstanding these things become into a problem situation. We came across a case in 2010, 2011, when there are a lot of talk about drones, for example, today. And drones, we are importing high-cost drones from US. And in 2011, there was a vendor who was supplying and had supplied drones. That time they were called UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. And even in 2010, 2011, Indian Armed Forces, including the BSF and the Army, had bought UAVs for monitoring the borders, and they had certain expectations from the vendor. Now, this is 11 years back. Now, what he supplied was acceptable to them, and they had bought it. And they had placed an order, and a large order, and the vendor had taken financial assistance from 3 banks, including Exim Bank. Halfway down the line, they upward revised their technical specifications because better quality drones came into the market, or they heard about them, or they heard about the specifications, or they revised the specifications. Now, when this vendor was an IIT graduate and 3 years into the line, or 4 years into the line, and he had produced a product which was quite satisfactory in the initial phases. Asking him to suddenly upgrade quality is not a, but the principle of no cost, no commitment came in, and they refused to pick up further production, even though order had been placed. So the account became NPA. And this supplier went out of business, and Indian capability to have internal production of drones came to a sudden halt. Now, this is a knee-jerk kind of a reaction. Today, we are again supporting drone manufacturers, and there was a news item that 2 or 3 orders for domestic supply from startups for drone, and these things have taken place. But the lost ground which we have been saying because of this policy is quite tremendous. And who knows, a lot of orders placed for drone purchase may not have taken place if the same vendor had been supported, and instead of a no cost, no commitment, R&D support had been given, because he was a bright guy and apparently satisfactory to them. But these problems happened. These are the problems these companies are facing, and these are where the costs of lending to defense MSMEs are high. But otherwise, if you look at it in a long perspective over 70 years, India defense sector has done quite well, and we are quite well respected internationally. And Indian frigates have been exported, and which is not a mean task, and it's quite a sophisticated. So we have to be proud of what we have done, but there are problems in defense production, which I have mentioned. Over to you, Shivi.
Yeah, thank you, Madhubhai Saab. I'll straight away, because if we're running short on time, move to Arvind Bhai Saab, who's spent good time with the Finance Commission, and the Finance Commission came up with a stellar recommendation of Modernization Fund for Defense Internal Security, MFDIS. I think if that is agreed to and follow, that would probably help solve a large number of our problems regarding resources being available for the defense. So, Arvind Bhai Saab, with limited resources any economy has, how do we extract additional resources from the existing, especially to finance our defense economy?
Thanks, Shivi. I'll try and keep it brief. Those of you may be interested, there's a chapter 11 in the 15th Finance Commission report, just about 20 pages, that is looking at the defense sector as a whole and the thoughts of the Finance Commission on this defense issue. I'm not going to try and attempt to summarize it here. I'll just pick up a few salient points from that. On this whole concept of Atmanirbharta, while this discussion was going, my mind went back to my defense days. And I remembered a particular conversation I had with Pakistani naval officer, senior rank. And we were doing an informal conversation between us on some issues. But among that, he made the statement to me, he said, हमें दोनों मुल्कों को दूसरे जो मुल्क हैं वो जो है वो लोहा सोने के भाव पे बेच रहे हैं. Now that's the kind of multipliers that happen in this market, where there is a huge profit margin to be made because of ITRs, technology, force multipliers, whatever. But the essential point is some countries gain a lot. And it's a well-known fact that India is the largest arms importer in the world. Saudi Arabia may be close to it, but India is one of the largest and has been. This is a recorded conversation, so I need to be very careful about what I say. But among the thoughts that went into this whole issue was also the fact that imports of arms gives the country no money multiplier effect also, which means basically it's a drain in the sense that if you were producing within the country, you would be creating jobs, you would be having people who are paid for the services who will spend from that money. But if you are importing, it's a complete kind of a drain of your resources. So I'm just trying to put the thoughts together of why this concept of self-reliance comes in. It comes in from the economic angle. More important, it also comes in from the strategic angle, because in the case of any conflict, if you are on a platform which is of a foreign vendor, then you're totally dependent upon spares at that point of time or before the conflict on that vendor. You may not have the capacity for the critical spares, and your entire platform may become vulnerable or even non-operational simply because of the spares. As they say, a kingdom is lost for the want of a nail. So you may have the most advanced technological stuff, but if that nail is not there, it's of no use to you. So these are all the thoughts that make you think about this whole issue of defense capital expenditure, and within the defense capital expenditure, about the import content within the defense capital expenditure. Now, even within the issue of defense capital expenditure, it's no secret that the overall percentage of the defense budget being spent for defense capital has been shrinking. And this is a matter of serious policy concern, because the need for platforms is much greater in today's world. And at the same time, your defense outlays, within that, the defense capital component has been shrinking. This then gets actually linked to many, many other issues. It gets linked to the issue that salaries and pensions within the defense budget have been increasing at a very, very fast rate. Pensions, in fact, have been increasing at a compound annual growth rate of more than 16% per annum. And while the union government had finished pensions from 2004 for the civilian sector, because of the peculiar nature of the armed forces, the pension system remained post 2004. So in effect, if you look at civilian and military pensions, it's the military pensions that are rising, and that crowding out effect is taking place, which is putting a pressure on defense capital. It's actually because of all of these issues that the union government gave us specific terms of reference to the 15th Finance Commission, asking the 15th Finance Commission to examine this matter. And essentially the purpose was, how do you protect defense capital outlays? That was the broad kind of terms of condition, that how do you protect these defense capital outlays? So many innovative thoughts did go into the discussions. There was a large amount of discussion that happened across the whole spectrum, including, of course, with all the three armed forces, the Ministry of Defense, etc. And as I said, I don't want to take up too much time in all those. But one of the very straight, low-hanging fruit that emerged immediately was that whenever defense, fortunately, has a large pool of land estate assets, large military farms, etc., cantonment board areas, and other military controlled assets of land. So in fact, whenever any developmental project takes place in the country and any defense land is required, the mechanism earlier used to be that the concerned state government or the central government, union government, they would have to find land of equivalent value to the armed forces to be given in exchange for defense land. And that used to hold up a large number of projects, because if you wanted a highway widening or you wanted certain areas under the SEZ, etc., you ran into these kinds of issues. Later on, it was decided that, well, it's difficult to find this equal value for land exchange kind of a mechanism. So the idea was, all right, there will be compensation paid for the acquisition of such land also. So what we did was, we have suggested, and it's a strong recommendation that has been made, that if it goes into the general consolidated fund of the government, then the armed forces don't really have an incentive to give up that land, because that money doesn't directly come to them. It may come through the union budget, but there is no direct linkage that may happen. So what was suggested was that you sequester such receipts into a separate non-lapsable defense pool capital fund. You sequester such kinds of payments, and this will incentivize developmental projects to also take off faster for the areas that are required. At the same time, the defense capital budget can also get augmented. So that could be one area to do it. There would be other areas for such a funds to be augmented by issues concerning the kind of demonetization, in a sense, you may say, or asset monetization of defense land, which may not be required immediately for public purpose, but can be done. Some amount of movement of the private sector into the public sector units, the defense ordnance, factory services, etc. And in fact, what we had also suggested in the Finance Commission was that create a non-lapsable fund also, because it's difficult for the armed forces to do a one-to-one match every year about their budget and their requirements. If you're ordering Rafales, for instance, you will need to pay for them maybe over a series period of time. You may have a lapse of a budget taking place in a particular year, but you may require that amount in the subsequent year. So some marginal tinkering could be done for a non-lapsable fund so that you build up this pool. But the heart of the chapter report also says that there are some hard policy choices to be made about your the salary and the pension issues regarding the manpower. How do you utilize your manpower without retiring them too early? Can you absorb them in paramilitary forces so that your pension outlays come down? So all of these issues have been taken up. And as I said, I don't want to get into all the details. Sufficient to say that the country does need greater defense capital expenditure. GDP growth rate is very important overall, because defense outlays typically are about 2% of GDP. So if your GDP is growing faster, you get a greater resource envelope. And within the defense capital itself, there's a very strong recommendation that has been made that a roadmap needs to be chalked out, that by 2025-26, out of the total defense capital outlays, the total import content should not go above 30%. That, I think, is a very critical one, which, if there is a roadmap that can be evolved, that would certainly collate all these strands that have been discussed by Alok and Madhu regarding the self-reliance aspect and your preparedness. I stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Arun Bhai Sahab. I think, we have to find out strategies as to, how do we generate extra resources. The total capital outlay for a country in our Indian economy, I think, is about 3.5 lakh crore. 1/3 of that, if not more, goes into.
Maybe I forgot to make one point. The point that's important, and which was a figure which surprised me also, when we started looking at these figures, the total capital expenditure of Government of India, out of that, the defense capital expenditure was anywhere between 1/3 to 1/4 every year. So, it's a serious problem from that point of view also, that of a limited kitty which is available for, say, railways, roads, defense, the defense capital expenditure was picking up almost 1/3 to 1/4 of that expenditure.
That's Arvind, because 1/3 of that goes into servicing the defense capital expenditure, and out of that 1/3, which is probably 1 lakh crore, 70% of that goes into committed liabilities, which means that you're servicing the old acquisitions. So when you look at the new acquisitions, you hardly have any resources available for new acquisitions. And the other point is about salaries. In fact, pensions, not salaries, pension. Our defense budget is about 1.6 to 1.7% of the GDP. When you include pensions, it becomes 2.3% of the GDP. Now, how do we address this issue? It's a phenomenal drain with 1.2 million armed forces personnel. What is the solution for that? Do we reduce the number of soldiers? Do we have lateral absorption? And there are many other ways that we can address this. But we will discuss that probably in the Q&A. Now I move to Ranu Mama, who is going to add flavor and romance. And I did not realize that poetry is deeply intertwined with romance. And that is why that first, the video didn't play, because it was waiting for Ranu Mama to add a little bit of romance. And we'll try to play that after you finish your remarks. So apart from his travels, Ranu Mama has traveled extensively to China. From the eastern to the western, seeing the Karakoram highway, like no one else. We also going to look at how the future battles are going to be fought. Are we going to be fighting in the air like dogfights of the 1970s? Are we going to be using missiles, or there's going to be a 12-year-old Major Narayan sitting in some island and literally screwing up your nerve center? When it comes to pensions, am I imagining too much to say that you might have Gemini soldiers? You could create soldiers through STEM technology and give them a life of 25 years and say, okay, you come, you fight for us, and you die. And that is the end of you, the Gemini soldiers. So there is so much of, the next is, do we need aeroplanes, Rafales, 200 crore, I know what's the $700 million, I don't know what's the price of each aeroplane, but do we need them? Or what we recently saw in Azerbaijan versus Armenia, the swarm drones, which is now the Indian Army is also placed some orders with the Indian startups. So Ranu Mama, to you now to add flavor, and then we'll play that video.
Great. So if you expect me to answer all those questions and still add romance to what I'm going to say, you're expecting too much.
Yeah.
But anyway, since you asked me to speak about China, it is widely believed, I think, by most people that a major adversary going forward will be China. And since I know that country quite well, I have been asked to share my views by Shivi on the subject. I've traveled, let me repeat, widely across China for work and for vacations, from Xinjiang, start of the Karakoram Highway in Kashgar, which is their Western Military Command. I have witnessed a whole lot of military over there, and to Shenyang, which is their Northern Command Center, which is on the border with Siberia near Vladivostok, and to dozens of their quasi-military industrial and technology units. I have had the privilege of visiting some of these as well. But let me talk about the threat a little bit, because your entire procurement program and your industry must be based on what is your threat perception. I'm going to give you my view of the threat perception. From George Fernandez, who said in the mid-90s that China is our enemy number one, to the Home Minister who recently said we will recapture Aksai Chin, to Sonam Wangchuk saying that if we ban Chinese apps, we will bring them to their knees. Much of this discourse over the last 18 months is focused on what you, Shivi, essentially spoke about at the beginning, on Galwan, Pangong So, fingers, and so on. But let me say, in my humble opinion, and some of you will not agree with this, Ladakh, Doklam, and Arunachal, by the way, we did phenomenally well in Ladakh and Doklam, along our northern borders are not likely to be the major flashpoints with China, in my opinion. There are reasons for that. The major one is that the Chinese know that they cannot win in this sector, in a limited border conflict, or in a limited large-scale conventional face-off either. The terrain coming in from Xinjiang into Aksai Chin is much worse than the terrain going in from the Indian side to the forward areas. And they have to pass through very, very difficult terrain. But I will address this in a minute. To do that, to support my statement that the Chinese know that they cannot win, I have to speak a little bit about the background. The Chinese psyche, the wolf warrior, is a bit of a myth, I'm afraid. This is not to say that they are weaker than our soldiers. In fact, as you mentioned, they are trying to have stem cells injected in their soldiers to try to create super soldiers and all of that. But probably, this is also true that they're weaker than our soldiers. It is simply that they're not willing to die in the cause. And there are sociological and psychological reasons for that. I'm now limiting myself to border conflicts or a limited conventional conflict on the border. And there are several reasons for this, not willing to die. The single child policy is the biggest one. This has had two significant impacts since it was started in 1980. Each young soldier or adult is the safety net for 6 adults, 4 grandparents and 2 parents. The child, because he was a single child, spoiled by 6 adults, is generally spoiled, being the only youngster in the nuclear family. In other words, the PLA does not have the appetite for human war casualties. And the repercussions on the CPC will be much more profound than on our central government. We celebrate our war heroes. The Chinese will hide them, as they recently did, not only from the world, but more important, from their own people. That is not to say that we'll push them back and occupy Aksai Chin. If there was a danger of that, the Chinese would escalate the conflict to a missile, drone, cyber, space war, or whatever you have, where they have a disproportionate advantage over us. Just to state a simple fact, that their J-series fighters are generation 5, and our Rafale fighters are generation 4.5. This is not a likely scenario at all. There will be mutual intent, in my view, to maintain a peaceful border unless there is provocation or a threat to economic interests. I will come to that in a minute. I do not think that the Chinese have appetite, or we certainly don't have the appetite to conquer territory. The future wars that China will fight will be on the seas, in the South China Sea and in the Taiwan Straits. They know that they cannot win in the Indian Ocean. We are too powerful in the Indian Ocean. They know that, and they have prepared for fighting on the sea. They have built permanent aircraft carriers in those 6 islands that they built. I happen to know one of the guys who's built one of those islands. And hopefully we will not be involved in that theater. I hope not. I hope we do not get pulled into by our somewhat, I will not describe it, but our alliances. For the Chinese, all future conflicts will be for economic reasons, for grain, for meat, for fish, for energy. These are in short supply. Believe it or not, food is in short supply. China is not a successful agriculture country. They need a supply chain. They're not going for territory. You've seen how much land they have bought up in Africa for farming. China has been invaded with brutal consequences in the 100 years before 1950. Opium wars were brutal. Slavery, mass executions, plunder, the level of brutality to rival the Jewish and the Russian genocide in the Second World War. In fact, even more. As Obama said famously, it's the economy, stupid. That is what drives China now. The reason for the Belt and Road is economic. Access to these raw materials and resources. For Guador, for Chabahar, which they're trying to enter into, it is significantly into that port. The Sitwe in Myanmar, Hambantota in Sri Lanka. These are economic lifelines. And let me talk a little bit about Russia on the northern border. They have bought the Russians. They have bought the Russians by offering them long-term contracts for the natural gas at a much higher price. At the moment, on the northeast border of China, the border is open and any Russian can walk in and get a work permit in 15 minutes at 4 times the salary that he would get in Russia. This is how they have bought the Russians. The Russians are not going to move away from them. They were our all-weather friends, but we've lost that. Let's turn to internal unrest in China. Hong Kong and Taiwan, which are not yet Chinese, but it's just a matter of time. The Manchu, which is the largest ethnic minority, which has traditionally been very, very strong, has now been well assimilated with the majority Han, which is the majority in China, as are most of the 55 minorities that are there. The Tibetans, over 6 million, are very docile people and are comfortable with increasing prosperity. Same language, same time zone, thankfully different foods. The threat really is from the Uyghurs. 10 million in Xinjiang. I have met so many of them. Fiercely protective of their Turkic roots. They're not Mongoloids and they are Muslim. I have just 1 or 2 little stories. I went to Xinjiang and I've traveled all over Xinjiang. By the way, there are 30,000 operating mosques in Xinjiang at the moment, operating. But when I went in 2010, my guide was a guy called Mohammed. We were in Urumqi, and he said, Ranu, would you like to, I'd like to take you to one of the places that I'm very proud of. I said, what? He said, I want to take you to the square where we massacred 230 Han people just 2 years ago. And Mohammed took me and my other friends, 4 of us, to this square, very proudly showed us this is where they massacred the Han. This is the biggest risk of the Chinese. And now with the Taliban in Afghanistan, they have no idea what they're in for. So my travels, I have many, many friends in China. Mostly these are university professors. We like to think of the Chinese as inscrutable. They're not inscrutable. It's just that they don't open out in public. They will discuss anything with you against Xi Jinping, what they call the emperor, in private, on a one-on-one basis. But anyway, that's all I have to say. I do not think that China, in any significant way, and India is going to have a conflict.
Okay, Rana Mama. Yeah, I think the Chinese are absolutely petrified for want of resources. And apart from the Karakoram Highway to Gwadar, which was meant to be an alternate to the sea route, they also have one running through Vladivostok, Russia, and to Germany. So they have created alternate routes, and they're one of the few countries who have the ice crushers, which they use to travel across the Arctic and again to access Europe. So they are absolutely petrified. I'm going to play that video, and I'm sure it's going to play now.
Do that.
Share.
लहरा लो तिरंगा जरा आँख में भर लो पानी जो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी जरा याद करो कुर्बानी.
So I was sure it's going to play now because poetry has to be intertwined with romance. So that is a C-130 landing at DBO, Daulat Beg Oldi, the world's highest airfield, at an altitude of 16,000 feet. And this, when you're doing a circuit to land on this airfield, you're actually going almost touching the road that the Chinese had built after Dalai Lama entered India in 1959. So it's a very historic base. Also, it's the highest airfield. It tests aircraft beyond the envelopes. None of the aircrafts are designed to land at 60,000. So I thought I will end with that. And now over to Chandra.
Well, let me just say that we are open for questions, and maybe let me begin by saying that since there's been so much of a discussion on Afghanistan and the implications for India, and we are also on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So, the question to the panel really is that, it is speculated that China are going to be the front runners to take control because they are the only guys who have the money, which Afghanistan badly needs. And eventually they will take over the mineral trade. They will build their road connecting to Pakistan, Gwadar, and to Iran, Chabahar, and so on, for the reasons that have been spoken about. So how likely is that to happen? Would anybody like to respond? Ranu Chacha, you I think are the best placed, but I'd like the other panelists to chime in as well.
Okay, Chan. So I think the prospect of Chinese exploiting the mineral resources in Afghanistan is pretty slim. The terrain, the hostility, the entire environment, it has been tried by the Soviets, by the Americans. Not 1 ounce of whatever they have, the copper or whatever it is, has been extracted. I don't think that this is a possibility at all. I think the Taliban is just playing it very cool at the moment by promising to behave themselves so that they can recognize they get some money and they can go back to their opium trade and live as the Taliban do. I doubt that there will be any such occurrence happen.
Okay, interesting. Is there anybody else? Arvind, Alok, Madhu?
No, I agree with Ranu. See, Afghanistan, if you see the terrain, is not like what we know in India. Shivi had shown some photographs of Kashmir as seen from a distance. Afghanistan is somewhat like that. It's mostly hills and the small valleys and patches of valleys or slopes. And it's not a terrain which is easy to navigate. India, we had some lines of credit for a dam and some road projects. And when the construction activity was going on the last 3-4 years back, when there was no such Taliban issue as such, the progress was very slow because of the terrain factor. And that terrain will be a dampener for anyone and everyone who tries to go there. And that is why Afghanistan is Afghanistan. Taliban is effective only because of the terrain. So I don't think anything great is going to happen, except how Taliban behaves and how erratic they are. That's a separate issue. But mineral exports is not this thing in the near future.
Okay.
They Xander because of the terrain. A couple of
Chand, I have a question for the panel.
Yes, please go ahead.
The question I have is that you have not talked about Russia. Russia has partnered India all along, as far as procurement of arms defense platforms is concerned. Now, with the changing relations between Russia and China and between India and America, how does this impact the Russian supplies to India and our defense preparedness? And will this have any adverse impact on our industrial base and capability?
Great. So go ahead. Shivi, would you like to respond, or would you like to divert it to any of your panelists?
Does anyone want to take that? Otherwise, if not, then I can.
No, as far as the Indian base, Shivi, my experience is that Russian transfer of technology has taken place, and whichever area there is to transfer, that was a complete, what you call, honorable transfer. You know? So our level of indigenization has quite high. That is my limited information which I have on the Russian technology transfer.
But do we? Would the Russian cooperation wane, or would it be at the same level as before?
So Russia, you see, has fragmented since the time we know Russia as our solid defense partner. That was USSR. What had happened, and this is based on my experience in Exim Bank, that a lot of their production units were in countries which are no longer within the new Russia. They're in different geographies, and they got fragmented. Even their mixed supply systems, one of the constraints we experienced, were quite a few of the things were in different, there, and they had no longer access to control over them. And that is why a lot of upgradations which had to happen were slowed down. I'm only talking from a limited perspective, what my interaction at Exim Bank had experienced. So the image we have of Russia is a different image, and that is no longer valid today. But it's a very good supplier and a reliable supplier. And as I mentioned, whenever and wherever they had this transfer of technology agreements, they were punctilious. Transport was quite impeccable.
Okay, Shivi?
Yeah. So, Vishwamama, so what's happening is definitely the face of the the order of battle is altering. Earlier, there were only Russian-centric platforms which were available in the Orbat. Now you see a mix of others. But when you see in terms of the value, we do about $18 billion, or we've done since this decade or the turn of the century. With the Russians, we've done about $10 or $15 billion. I don't remember the exact figures with the Russians. So there isn't much difference in terms of that. Also, in the recent times, we haven't said that we will not take in S-400s just because the Americans are pushing us not to, and they're not able to squeeze us. So we are able to, I think, have a balance, and we're trying to look at the best possible what we can in terms of what is good for the country. And we are not going away from the Russians. We've just, S-400 is one. It's a huge, very high value acquisition that's coming in from the Russians. Then you have some additional Sus that were coming. We manufacture Sukhois in Koraput, but there are certain parts which we still continue to source from the Russians. We've just leased another vessel from them. So there is transactions which are happening both with the Russians, also with the Americans, and from the other countries as well.
So I'd like to mention to you, Vishu, with the Russians, we have moved from a strategic relationship to a transactional relationship. As Shivi said, we are acquiring several things from the Russians already. But 1971, the only fleet that came behind the 7th Fleet was the Russians. That is never going to.
That kind of commitment is now not going to be there.
We have pushed firmly into the embrace of the Chinese. So we have now transactional relationship. They want to sell us something, we want to buy something, we'll negotiate, and they'll supply us probably not the latest technology.
Okay, great. So it's 7:30, and if there are any last questions, yeah, there is something coming up from Veena Bua?
Yeah, this is
Gogi.
Gogi.
Gogi,
I
yeah, go
was
ahead.
wanting at a broad level, what we are seeing is an extremely dynamic environment in terms of technology, in terms of geopolitical dynamics. But our, defense procurement systems, institutional arrangements have not even delivered in the past in a much less dynamic environment. So I'm just wondering, is there any thinking on revisiting the institutional construct that goes into our defense procurement systems? Because frankly, it has not delivered any agility in an earlier model, let alone what will be needed in our emerging context. So I'm just wondering if there's any perspective on that. Is there any review happening on how our institutional model is configured for procurement? And what is happening in other countries? Do we learn anything from how they do it? Or are we like what is done in other countries?
Okay, so Shivi?
Okay, yeah, that's Gogs, that's a brilliant question. And in terms of the construct, I would say that, things in India happen the Indian way, and they just happen. I don't know how to explain it better, but they just happen. So when you look at the defense procurement procedure, it's been evolving since 2001. When you look at Chinese, they came up with a provision in 1999, and they were up and selling arms in 2000. But in India, since 2001 to 2021, there've been 7 or 8 defense procurement procedure. And the latest one being, the name is changed to defense acquisition procedure. That is one part. The second part is, in terms of the construct, the OFB until now was just a board. Now the government is trying to make it into a group of companies. And I think that is a very good reform if it happens, or if the workers let it happen. That will be a great reform, both for the country as well as for the ordnance factory. The second is that since 2001, the private players have started participating in this business of defense economy. Despite bleeding, despite the processes being slow, they are participating. So now you see L&T is now making a shift for the United Kingdom. You have Alpha Technology, Dynamatics, Zen. They're doing some stuff for the Indian Army. The swarm drones are being seed funded by the defense services, and they're coming up with some. The Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, is also coming up with swarm drones. So there is traction. But like I said, the processes are so slow, but still the industry is holding on. And that is the resilience shown by the industry. And that's the Indian characteristics of doing things. They take their own time.
Shivi, before you close, I just want to raise a very important question. And this issue was also raised by you. That is the procurement processes in India, which result in a huge time lag before the actual acquisition takes place. And by the time the acquisition takes place, the world has moved ahead. Has India benchmarked itself with other nations who procure defense equipment vis-a-vis the processes? Where are we slipping? And do we seriously need to, think it through, rationalize the processes in order that procurement happens much faster than how it happens now? I think that is a key issue that we need to grapple with. The second one is raising of resources. I think we are frittering too much on non-development things such as stuff like, redevelopment of Rajpath and all that jazz, construction of statues, which are all non-productive, and you're spending lots of money on that.
Ranu Mama.
Okay, yeah. Vaishali, go ahead, Vaishali.
Yeah, Vishu Mama, thanks. I just wanted to actually add, so in addition to benchmarking, the question is also that, are we looking at strategic partnerships, like technical partnerships? Is it strategic? And if any of the panelists could throw light on like who are expected to be good partners for us to do better, to do things faster, and so some light on that would be great. And just another aspect of the question, which is a slightly simpler aspect, is to what extent are we seeing more women get involved in the R&D, in the sort of manufacturing, any of those aspects in the defense? Because I think it's quite important. I was with someone just yesterday, and in fact, as the US ambassador, he was telling us that we as a country had sent the first CRPF contingent. I'm sure somebody from the bureaucracy can confirm, from India, and so where is that element in the defense? R&D, innovation, manufacturing, anything? I see some recruitment being more token sort of recruitment, but is there more substantial inclusivity we can hope for in future?
Okay, so should we go for it?
Okay.
Or divert it to one of your panelists? Maybe we could have some variety.
Yeah, so if anyone else wants to, then please.
Arvind?
Vaishali has raised some very interesting concepts, and regarding the gender issue, I think she is on the right track, that there is a lot of brain power that is available, which may have used in the same manner as it has been used by ISRO. So I think the R&D aspect, where the gender issues have been better tackled by ISRO, is something that maybe DRDO, etc. I'm not in the loop, so Vaishali, I can't really give you any direct feedback on this. I'm not in the loop at all. As far as strategic partnerships go, I think a choice was made sometime in the Vajpayee era that they would also look at a strategic partnership with the US. And that's why we saw a little bit of shifting away from Russia. So in a sense, that strategic decision was made during that time period. And it's because of that that the umbilical cord with the Russians was, I think, in some ways broken in that sense. But eventually, as I said in the beginning itself, the real holy grail is being able to do a lot of the manufacturing in India, or do a lot of the R&D in India. That's really the way to go. There is no other way. No country during a war can depend fully upon any strategic partner.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I think
Chand Bhaiya, can I just make one very quick small point, Chand Bhaiya?
It is 7:40 p.m. So
I have to answer Vishu Mama.
All right, quick answer. I'm afraid last answer.
Can I just make one point, Shivi, before you just on what Arvind Bhai Saab said? That Arvind Bhai Saab, you look at what US did for climate change, right? You look at what US did in Afghanistan. The question we want to think about is how reliable can they be? Because sometimes they are not as reliable and as continuous. But I'll just
it's a rhetorical question, Vaishali, which won't get an answer. But
absolutely,
but everybody will wonder about it.
Panel, you have not answered my question.
Yeah, I am going to answer.
How do we cut the red tape?
Quick, Shivi, 30 seconds.
Yes, Vishu Mama, that's great question in terms of benchmarking, because
before you answer, can I just very quickly give an answer to Vishu Mama on this?
Yeah, sure.
Being my co-director, you're most welcome.
Vishu Mama, as a practitioner, when I was in defense, as a practitioner,
was my co-director, and so was Madhu Raghunathan. And Alok Sheel. All of us are here today on the same panel.
So as a practitioner, Vishu Mama, on this defense procedure thing, just one very quick observation.
It's horrid, huh?
No, what really needs to be done is a greater and greater delegation of powers for a lot of the acquisitions to the armed forces directly, without bringing in the entire oversight mechanisms of the defense finance and the Ministry of Defense, etc. I think that's the way to go personally, because I think too much of that acquisition is happening through too many layers, and therefore to cut the layers, you need to give greater delegation of powers to the armed forces.
Yeah, but that is something which will not happen, Arvind, because the basic driver of government thought is fiscal dominance, how to save the budget and protect the budget from expenditure in this fiscal, and how to postpone expenditure to the next year. No delegation happens.
Once the delegation is done, the defense budget is the actual.
So that delegation will not happen because the budget itself, the budgeting process will not change.
Okay,
and that process is the problem.
You can see that there is no consensus. I think there is a lot of legacy. Let's see how the corporatization of the ordnance factory.
Unless you correct this infirmity in the system.
So
we will not be able to.
Corporatization of the ordnance factories is a step in that direction. Let us see how it works. The jury is out on that one. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we've actually run out of time. I want to hand back to Ranu Chacha for him to tell us what's coming up, and that would be the last piece of today's program. So, Ranu Chacha, over to you.
Shivi had something to say.
Veena Mausi, I think we're running short on time, so I will call up Vishu Mama and I'll have a word with him.
Yeah.
I'll call him.
My question is left, I'll type it.
Okay, sure.
नहीं बोलिए आप बोलिए ना वीना मौसी.
नहीं. I had a very, very basic question, which is that we started with we started with the point of Atmanirbharta as far as defense investment is concerned. I was just wondering, in view of the two facts that technology development is too fast in defense production, and the fact that we cannot waste time, is there any relevance of this concept of self-reliance and Atmanirbharta?
Alok bhai.
Alok.
I think in my limited manner, I'd indicated that this has limited relevance to the defense industry because it's a strategic area, and this Atmanirbhar concept has been evolved in relation to things which available readily in the market, where here governments play a major role. So and as I think who had pointed out that Atmanirbharta in the defense sector had long preceded Atmanirbhar Bharat. There always was an offset policy and so really I think the connection between the two is very tenuous.
It's a Hindi translation of an English word, self-reliance, and that is where you stop at it.
So
Ranu Chacha, back to you.
Please stay on. So next 3 sessions, the next 14 days, Namita will be presenting the Parivar tale on the Raghubir Sarandas family.
Very happily.
Yeah, great. Cheers.
Happen. And a month from now, 4 weeks from now, Devi will be doing a session on his wonderful photos on nature and wildlife. And I think that will be quite amazing. And then 6 weeks from now, my daughter Trishna will be presenting the B.S. Das family to the family. All right. So these are the next 3 sessions. And Chand, I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'll answer Vaishali's question after I stop the recording on strategic partnerships. Stay on, Vaishali, okay? All right?
Okay, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen, ladies.
Okay.